He grabbed me by the neck. He pinned me against the wall. People thought he was joking until my face started turning purple. And he put me in like a chokehold, or like basically just grabbed me with one palm, his strong hand, and just basically grabbed my neck and pinned me against the wall to the point where like I couldn't breathe. And he goes, "Say that shit again to me, motherfucker."
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, I just found out about this band called Cali Massey. I hope I say that right. And they're fucking awesome, so you should go check them out. New York hardcore took a positive turn in December 1994 when Shutdown emerged on the scene as one of the few bands ready to take their music and message to the next level. With an emphasis on old school values and new school musical sensibility, Shutdown were poised to take over where bands like Warzone, Cro-Mags, and Gorilla Biscuits left off. With older members of the NYHC crowd supporting these quote-unquote kids, success had been a natural transition. They played some of the biggest shows in past hardcore history, including one of the tributes to Raybeez from Warzone at CBGB's in the fall of '97. Raybeez himself actually went as far as to state that Shutdown is the future of hardcore. Shutdown stopped playing full-time shortly after finishing a quick stint on the Warped Tour in 2001. In 2006, Black and Blue invited Shutdown to play the NYC Superbowl of Hardcore, which stands as the biggest hardcore show in NYC every year. In 2010, Shutdown announced its rebirth back to playing and doing some random shows a few times per year. I say in the interview that Monkey was one of the reasons why I got connected to Mark, but it was actually Brian Schatzel who helped connect me. He had messaged me on Instagram and reached out to the drummer, which then led to me getting in contact with Mark. So Brian, you're the best. Thank you so much. And I apologize for always saying Monkey introduced me like so many episodes, even though he has introduced me to a ton of people. I got Mark on the Skype, and this is what we chat about. His thoughts on the current hardcore scene, Andy from Kill Your Idols, his brother is introducing him to hardcore, Rick to Life, the promo video he sent Tony from Victory, signing with Victory, California Takeover, why the band suddenly stopped, bands not liking them, working on a new record, the Harley story, and a ton more. This week's sponsor is Mint 400 Records. Mint 400 Records is an indie record label from New Jersey with bands across the United States, Canada, and Europe. The label features everything from indie rock and folk to post-punk and soul. Over 400 exciting releases. You can find Mint 400 Records releases streaming at Spotify, Pandora, Tidal, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Deezer, and more, or at all MP3 outlets worldwide. Visit mint400records.com for links and more info. Here's a clip from their artist Jan Mower's song 16 Minutes from their forthcoming release To Each Their Own Coat.
16 minutes till it hits. My baby's on the pitch. I'm left waiting for a kick.
Thank you, Mr. Sabatino, for always supporting the podcast. If you too would like to support the podcast by being sponsored, you could just email me at thiswasthescene@gmail.com. I don't know why I tell people that, because Neil's literally the only one who sponsors this. So, but I don't know, maybe we'll break the streak. That's all I got to say, so feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk, rock, nostalgia. With that said, let's get started.
Tell me about the time Harley almost murdered you in Kansas.
What? Wait, start with that.
Well, we could get into that later.
Yeah, we can.
But yeah, no, I got you. No, it's all good, man. I'm the type of person, like, ever since I was young, I'm very transparent in just everything I do, and sometimes that's a weakness, and sometimes that's a strength. But it's fine. Like, I'm open. I'm an open book, man. I love talking about this stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm the same way, man. Like, I literally like talk so much about my life and different podcasts I've done and like shit like that. But I understand when people are like, yeah, a little guarded about things. And it's funny, too, because this whole conversation is all based from 20 years ago when we were all, 20 or so, because you guys were started in 94 from what I was reading about. And so it's like, that's way longer. But you got to think, like, within that time, there's definitely things were a lot different then where people, there's such a, I don't want to get into it, but like nowadays, it's like you really have to really watch what you say about shit. And I think.
Oh, totally. Totally, man. One little comment will like turn your whole band upside down.
Yeah, it's crazy. I know. I talk about all the time of how much I fucking hate that, but
same. Yeah, same.
It's so goddamn annoying. Before we jump back into the past, I'm really excited about this too. I've been trying to find you it's so funny too because my buddy Monkey, he used to be a roadie for Bigwig and a bunch of bands, and I hit him up, or I posted on Instagram. I was like, anybody have a connection with any of these guys? And he like sent me a link to your profile. I was like, yeah, he's right there. I was like, how did I make this so difficult to find?
No, I can explain that because my Instagram page is like a year old. So like I was one of the last guys to join Instagram. I was like, I think I did it actually maybe 2 years now because it was right when the pandemic started. And I was like, okay, fuck it. I'm going to join Instagram.
So what made you do that?
We went to Europe in 2019 for one show. It was called The Sound of Revolution. It's in Eindhoven, Netherlands. And it was a sick show. So many different bands played. It was an amazing show. It was our first show in Europe. It was November 1st, I think, 2019. So right before the pandemic, really, like 4 months before it started. But the show was just insane. And, you know, when we came home, all these kids were hitting us up from Europe. And it was just like the right time. It was like my wife looked at me. She's like, you really need to start an Instagram page. And I should have just probably started a Shutdown one. But because I'm on it so much on my personal one, I just connected the two because I already had a Shutdown Facebook page. It's funny, as I say it to you now, I'm kind of convincing myself to probably put up a Shutdown Instagram page. I probably am going to do that after the Black and Blue Bowl.
I think you should. I mean, it is, even when I tried to, like before we got on the call, I was looking up to see if you did have an Instagram and
it's hard to find.
But there is some like DJ company called Shutdown.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. No, I'm very familiar. Yeah, they wrote me on YouTube, which is like really funny. They wrote me, I want to say like 3 years ago, and it was kind of funny because they were telling me that they use our name, and I was like, oh, cool. I'm like, what kind of music? And the guy's like, dance music, and I'm like, yeah, we're not that kind of music. And he's like, no, I checked your videos out and everything. It's really cool. We have the same name. I'm like, yeah, I'm not really feeling it the way you are. I'm like, if you could add something different to the end of your name. And like the next day, the guy started a Shutdown YouTube channel, like for dance music. And I was like, what an idiot. And then of course, it's funny because it all kind of ties into me not starting a Shutdown Instagram page, but like Shutdown, the name was like everywhere March of 2020. I mean, I got so many news articles. People sent it to me. I probably have 15 different people in New York hardcore send me the cover of the Daily News where it said, shut down, and it had like the biohazard symbol in the middle of the word shut down, and it was like the front page of the news because all the stores, it was like the day the pandemic hit, you know?
Oh my god, I just put two and two together of why the whole shutdown thing. Oh my god,
yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
So there was a lot of like spam weird stuff. Like I was getting weird traffic to our Facebook page. Very, very strange traffic. Like I could tell people were just Googling shutdown out of the pandemic and like randomly coming across our Facebook page.
That's so fucking crazy.
But it is. It's really weird. It's really weird. But and I think that was the hesitancy at that time. But as I talk to you now, I'm probably, you know, time permitting, I'm going to do it probably after the Black and Blue Bowl, just so we can. It's funny because I still have so many people that will find me, today included. I put up that flyer. And I had somebody message me that I haven't talked to in like 16 years. And they were like, Mark, I had no idea you were on Instagram. Like I just found you. So I don't know how people don't find me, like, but I'm just kind of getting myself out there.
I'll bet you anything. I mean, all you have to do is do like Shutdown NYC and people will find that easily. And then you can put like you can even put that flyer up as your first post. And I bet people will be, I mean, especially like this will come out in a couple weeks. So that'll drive more traffic to follow that and stuff. But when is actually, and talk about that festival because I just saw that too, which is so random that we're talking today because I didn't even know, because you just announced this today.
I know, the timing is perfect. The timing was perfect.
Crazy. So weird. So like what you had put the first time you'd played in 20 years, but technically that's what I read in like the write-up, but technically you played in 2019 going into 2020.
Yeah, no, we played like 5 shows in the last 20 years, but what I put was this was our first time playing Brooklyn, our hometown, in 20 years, which is the truth. The last Brooklyn show we played, homecoming show, if you will, it was the Brooklyn Fest, which was in a Jewish temple. It was called the Temple. I don't know if you remember this place. It was in Brooklyn. It was August of 2001. It was a 2-day festival, very similar to what you see now. It was just much smaller, but it was like day one was like Shutdown, Kill Your Idols, Sworn Enemy, and Kill Your Idols was a new band, so was Sworn Enemy. They were pretty new at that time, but like, you know, that was and day two was I can't remember, Blank. It was more punk. It was like Blank 77 and a bunch of more punk bands. I want to say no, Bigwig didn't play the second day, but bands in that vein. That was our last Brooklyn show, and that was August of 2001 at a Jewish temple in Brooklyn in the basement. Besides that, you know, we actually a week after that, we did 2 weeks on the Warped Tour in August of 2001, which was like probably the last touring that we actually did. That was a really, really fun time, but it was also kind of sad because we knew we were taking a break. after that. We had toured like 8 out of 10 months that year, and we knew like the guys wanted to go back to college and stuff like that. That was the last tour we did, actually. And then since then, in 2005, or excuse me, 2006 was we played Black and Blue Bowl. That was the last Black and Blue Bowl we played. That was in New York City. And then we played a headlining show at Bowery Electric in 2010 with Black and Blue Productions, put that show on. It was called Back on the Bowery. It was like the first show close to CB's since CB's had closed. And Wisdom in Chains was one of their first shows open for us. And then after that, we played Tsunami Fest in 2012. So that was like the third show since we had split. And that's, the festival that goes on every year in Reading, Pennsylvania. My buddy Chris has a great club out there called Reverb. That was with Blood for Blood and 108 and Trial. That was a crazy show. And then we played Tompkins Square Park in 2017. That was the Raybeez tribute with, that was a crazy day. Kill Your Idols and the Warzone tribute and Fireburn played. And, it's kind of sad to think now that two of the guys who played that day aren't with us anymore, Vinny Value and Todd Youth. That was in Tompkins Square Park. And then we went to Europe in 2019 and did the Sound of Revolution Festival. And then H2O invited us in October of last year in 2020. They had already booked these shows, so they were kind of like pre-sold. Comeback Kid, or one of those bands I think was supposed to be their main support and couldn't do it anymore. I believe it was Comeback Kid. So he called me kind of like 3 weeks before the show, and he was like, "Hey, you guys want to play? 2 nights, sold out in New York." I was like, "I'm there." So I was, we booked that, and we wound up playing to kind of like H2O's crowd both those nights, but they have such a positive, like fun crowd that it was a really good time. And that was it. That's like I just went through like 5 shows. That's literally the only 5 shows we've played since we stopped being full-time as a band since 2001.
Is it kind of awesome? Like I talked to Andrew from Strife, and they were talking about playing the latest California Takeover and then all these other shows coming up. And we were talking about the comparison of the crowds back 20 years ago and now, and what's different or the same. And for you guys, so I mean, I guess I technically could ask the same question about 2019 because it's not that long ago. There's 2 things I want to ask. Like I'll ask the first one first, the second one after I ask this. But like when you played that show in 2019, and I mean all those other shows, it sounded like were great, but 2019 you play that show, you said it's nuts, and then compare that to like 2001 prior to Warped Tour, like it's just more of a club scene. What did you think of the difference or the same, or like the similarities in the crowd?
In Europe or just in general?
Just in general, like just the hardcore crowd in general, like now compared to then.
Yeah, so like one of the things about hardcore that it's definitely maintained is that it's definitely a mix of really young kids that have probably never heard of or seen our band. I'm getting a lot of that lately, which is kind of cool because it's like a rebirth. Our first record, Against All Odds, in a very strange way is like this. If I showed you, like, we all have Spotify for Artists on our phone, and it's just we keep getting these things like that record in the last year has gotten like quadruple the amount of attention it's gotten from the past 10 before that. And the reason that I didn't know that was like really cool to me, and part of why I love hardcore, is because there's this really young new generation of kids that are like literally like when I was 14, 15, 16 getting into it. And they're just researching hardcore like when I was 14, 15, 16. And, the bands that I was looking back at were, of course, the 80s bands like, Gorilla Biscuits, Youth of Today. Well, they're looking back at 90s hardcore, Strife, Snapcase, Earth Crisis, but then they go to like different pockets of scenes. And when they come across like the late 90s New York hardcore scene, they find us, they find Indecision or Fahrenheit or No Redeeming. So to answer your question, like at the shows, hardcore has maintained its sensibility to me, where even at the H2O shows, it was a very steady mix. Of course, we got the kids our age. I say kids, we're all in our 40s now. It's just like young at heart type of stuff. But all of my dear friends, came to those shows, and it was like seeing those people. For me, living in Florida, being able to come home and see those people, it's like you feel like revitalized. You almost feel like you're rejuvenated because you had so much love for these people and you had so many memories with these people that, some of them I don't get to talk to all the time. Some of them I don't get to speak to on the phone or, share pictures of the kids or things like that. And a lot of these shows that there's that older crowd always comes out loyal to the bone, man. They'll always support us if we come home or play in New York or even in Europe. Like there were kids that we had met 20 years ago that literally wore the shirt they bought 20 years ago to our show in Europe just to show us like, yo, I was at the show 20 years ago. And that was really cool. But I think the crowds have really been very similar. The only difference I see now, and it's not so much in Europe, because in Europe, it's always been bonkers. If you've ever been to a hardcore show in Europe, I mean, it's just so awesome. The energy at a European hardcore show is, take, the California takeover shows, for example. I mean, I'm just trying to put it into comparison. Like that was a favorite CD of mine, that live CD back in the late 90s. And it was a mainstay in our van when we toured. The energy at like that one show where you'd have to get those 3 gigantic bands together at that time to create that like energy, that's the energy at like every European hardcore show.
Jesus.
So it's like, you could see like there's videos of our set from that show, and I mean as a hardcore band, you're not used to getting like an ovation just walking onto the stage, right? And it's like that's how they treat you in Europe, like it's not rock star stuff because everybody's cool, and of course there's a level of everybody's friends, but they really like it's almost like they've been listening and they've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and when they see you, like you could literally feel their vein, like you could feel the passion, and it like I'll tell you, like, it was the funnest time, that Europe show. It was just like, it blew me away because a lot of kids, I mean, I expected some kids to know the words, but it was really cool. Like, it was, I think that show was 10 times better than I even thought it would go over as. And it was just really fun because, like, I could go backstage and then I see people like Mike DeJean. And I'm like, Mike DeJean has known me since I was 13 years old. And then I go into the corner of the room and I meet one of our old German roadies who came to the show just to come hang out. And he was our tour driver for 2 years, and I hadn't seen him in 20 years, Then next to him was a group of kids who were 15 years old, X'd up, straight edge kids, who brought copies of Few and Far Between for us to like sign. And it's like, that's just stuff like you don't do, like you don't see that a lot in the States. So there's a level of appreciation in Europe that it really just, it's something that I can't describe. It's amazing. I love touring Europe. I love touring the States, but there's just something about Europe that I think every hardcore band will tell you that it's just really special if there's something very authentic about it.
I think at the same time, this will be like the 4th year doing this, and there's always these little things that I kind of pick out, like this makes sense to me with because I really haven't interviewed too many hardcore bands. Like I did Kill Your Idols, I did Strife.
Both good friends of mine. I love both those bands.
Yeah, Andy's the fucking man.
Andy's a great guy. Yep. So is Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew, I just met. Andy, we met 20 years ago. Like he was like, this guy is like the sweetest fucking dude ever.
He really is. He's like a teddy bear. And it's funny because he always tells me, Mark, I gave you a hard time for moving to Florida. He's like, then I followed you 15 years later. So he's, quick story about Andy and my history is Andy used to come to CBGB's every Sunday. Sometimes by himself. Sometimes he was with Paul, who he started Kill Your Idols with, who's in Black Anvil now. And I remember the week that he told me he started a band called Kill Your Idols, and he was at a Shutdown show at CB's. We played CB's so many Sundays, and he came and he's like, Mark, it's like, I'm starting this old band. It sounds like Negative Approach, very Negative Approach influence. It is like, your brother Mike will love it. He goes, I'm going to call it Kill Your Idols. And like, I could literally remember that conversation of him. And I sometimes, every time I see him, I'll bring that conversation. I'm like, do you remember at CB's coming up to me? And Andy always wore like this, like kind of backpack, kind of like those, remember those, they weren't backpacks, but we all wore them back in the day. They were like those, not JanSports, but like you put them around your chest kind of, and like they hang off the back. I guess they're like a backpack, but they're not like a genuine backpack.
I do not remember this.
I can't think of what they look like. They kind of look like a satchel, but it's like a bigger satchel. Listen, the point is that Andy was like a sweet guy. He was just somebody that I became very good friends with early on. And when he started Kill Your Idols, I loved every minute of it. Andrew from Strife, funny story about him is we just kind of celebrated our first California trip. And we do it every April because we made some really close friends in April of 1998 off the Against All Odds tour, which is the first tour we actually got to tour California. And we played California maybe at least 7-8 times that one year. I mean, we did about 8 tours that year, and I think Cali, we went to every one of them. We made some really good friends in Hollywood and LA and Southern California that were just like the Cali version of us, of what we figured, And it was a band at the time called Collision, who was, they were a straight edge band. The singer's name was Vic, and he was best friends with Andrew. And he said, hey, I know you guys are probably into Strife. He's like, when you play Hollywood, I'm going to introduce you to my friend Andrew. And that's the first time I had met Andrew. And we were like all big Strife fans, like In This Defiance and One Truth. We were like big. So just getting on Victory and touring and meeting all these bands, in a lot of ways, we were like meeting a lot of the bands that we looked up to, And Andrew became a friend. And the next few times we played, LA, he would always come and things like that. And Vic, the reason I tell this story is his band One Choice, who's around now, is playing the Black and Blue Bowl. Life Comes Full Circle. They're from LA, and they're flying to New York for the Black and Blue Bowl to open the second day. And he is like a long lost brother for me. And he's just an overall great guy. And again, the friendships we made in 1998, so many of them carried forward. And Vic is just a perfect testament to that, because this guy is literally could be like a fifth member of our band. And that's how close we are with him. So it all kind of ties into Andrew.
The one thing that stood out to me, I was like saying before, is that hardcore, it's funny because the music itself is like very aggressive, and it's like it's positive, but it's also could be intimidating if you don't understand, if you're not like understanding what everyone's saying and stuff. But you got to think though, in like, so I'm from like a pop punk era, and like it was a pop punk band and shit like that, and there's a distance between pop punk and like the crowd, unless the crowd's coming on stage and stage diving, stuff like that. But it's a different element with hardcore, because you guys, especially as singers, you're like touching the audience, and that creates such an extra bond there. I feel like that's another reason why the energy is so much stronger in that scene.
It definitely helps. It definitely helps, you know, and I'm glad you said that, because the person that always kind of, I'm somebody that I won't do it the whole set, but I'm constantly like, I love crowd participation. Part of what I love about hardcore is crowd participation. And that's not just me putting a mic into the crowd. I love going to shows and singing the words to my favorite bands, you know, like I'm super excited to go Saturday. Ignite is one of my favorite bands, and we've toured with them, and they're a band I haven't seen in years, and I can't wait to see them. Same thing with Agnostic Front and Sick of It All. I love the participation factor. I think you're right about that. Raybeez was somebody that literally used to talk to me about that and tell me how that's what set hardcore apart from stuff like pop punk and alternative music, because he felt that, you know, there was a like authenticity about, you know, kind of like being one with the crowd. That's why Raybeez played every show in the crowd. That was like his thing. Like he stood in the crowd and sang, and people stood around him. And I couldn't go that far, but I agree, man. I think that that's what's special about it. It's something different. You know, I have a lot of friends in pop punk bands, and I go to their shows. A matter of fact, I took my son, my 12-year-old, to his first concert back in October to see Newfound Glory, who's my friends. And Chad is a very old dear friend of mine, and he gave him like the full experience, you know, took him on the bus and, you know, gave him tickets, and my son was on the side of the stage singing all the words, and, you know, they gave him picks and this and that. And it was like, he literally had the time of his life. But the difference of like a pop, and by the way, Newfound Glory rule, I love those guys, but the difference is, you know, there was a barricade, and it's a kind of a different vibe. You're right. Like it's, the fans of pop punk bands are more, they look up to those bands, right? But in hardcore, it's kind of like we're all on the same level.
Yeah, and I actually went to that Newfound Glory tour because they played with, Jesus Christ, who did they play with?
Last year, right?
Yeah, Less Than Jake. Less Than Jake opened up.
That's the one. That's the one, because the Simple Plan canceled.
Yeah, they canceled the whole thing, or they canceled their part of it. But yeah, it's like, and it, like I love it too because I'm watching Less Than Jake, and like, but both of those bands are really great at like the showmanship and getting the crowd to sing.
They're amazing, man. I was singing, yeah, they really are.
And there's a distance like between that where they are on the stage and the crowd. They're like, there's no there is no like grabbing someone's head, force the mic in their hand. So there is such a difference, and you have to, and it's like, I sort of like a pop punk stance, you really have to like work the crowd. Hardcore, it's not saying you don't have to work the crowd, but it's like you just fucking get in there. And,
that's it.
And you're right. The whole room is like on the same page. There is no.
It's like everybody just wants to let the release out. You know, there's no. It's like an energy that everybody's just building up to let it out. It's totally different. Now I will say this about Newfound Glory, to Chad's credit. Chad is a hardcore guy, right? He's straight edge Chad. He's Chad Bull. So it's like he maintains that like hardcore element when he's on stage of like screaming and like putting the mic. He literally, I think, even took the mic stand and like pointed it into the crowd. And it was funny. I was laughing with him. I'm like, you know, you still maintain your hardcore sensibility. We were laughing about it. It was really cool for my son, because I'll tell you, my son at 12, I have 2 boys and 2 girls. My oldest son's going to be 15 on Sunday, I have a 12-year-old boy and also have a 7 going on 8-year-old daughter in the same month of May, and then I have a daughter due in July. It would be my 4th. My son, the only one that's really embracing kind of like the music a little bit would be my 12-year-old Julian, and he didn't embrace hardcore. He embraced Newfound Glory. And I said, cool, I'm going to kind of inch my way into hardcore with him.
Yeah.
And after Newfound Glory, he comes to me like after that concert, and he was like really riding a high from that concert. Maybe because he got that like really cool experience. You know, I never got to go on a tour bus when I was that age, you know, or like, you know, be on the side of the stage, you know, it was their hometown. I mean, it was in Fort Lauderdale. It was a crazy show, right? He began to look up music, and the next day he came to me, and would you take a guess at who his new favorite band is? Turnstile.
Oh, I love Turnstile.
So he's like obsessed with Turnstile. And the point of my story, I guess, is that he, you know, pop punk and hardcore, and really they're all door openers to other things. So I feel that a lot of pop punk people, I love pop punk, by the way. I have a ton of pop punk that I listen to right now on my Spotify, but it's like I've always liked pop punk. But I think a lot of people use elements of different things from the pop punk scene, or people might even go to, other types of music shows, and they see something they like about hardcore shows, and then they go down that little rabbit hole, whether it's on YouTube or on their phones or whatever they're looking it up on, and they start to gravitate little by little, like, wow, this stuff is really raw and aggressive, and there's no rules, and it's just really cool, kind of like balls to the wall music.
Like, I always liked harder music, and then my friends were like, we're going to play punk, and that's why I got into punk rock. I was a big fan of Tool and stuff like that before I got into punk rock, but then I'd hear like Snapcase and Strife and like these harder bands, and I was talking to Andrew. I said that when I saw the In This
Defiance,
yeah, and I saw Blistered on Cinema Beer Nuts, I was just like, I have to know everything about this band. So like I
remember that,
yeah, man. So this is a good way to segue into how you got involved, because you're talking about all the things that you gravitate to in the hardcore scene. So was that something that you knew before you got involved in the scene, or is that something you figured out after you got involved in the scene?
So for me, my brothers were involved in the scene. They got into hardcore in like the mid to late 80s. And I was just a little guy. I was born in 79, so I was literally 8 years old in 1987, right? My brothers and I shared a room. My parents had 5 boys. My mother and father had 5 boys, and I'm the youngest. At that time, I was 8 years old. Let's just take 1988. I was 8 going on 9. My birthday's in September, so most of the year I was 8. And my brothers were, the youngest after me would be Mike, who plays in Inhuman, The Last Stand, and Confusion. And he's a New York hardcore lifer, but he's turning 49 this year. So he's almost 7 years older than me. Imagine now, after Mike comes John, who's almost 9 years older than me. And after John comes Kevin, who ran Castle Heights, and he's almost 12 years older than me. And then I have my oldest brother, who has no affiliation with hardcore, but lives down here in Florida, and he's like 15 years older than me. So I was kind of like that late surprise in my family. Now, the reason I say that is because I was young, and we grew up in a pretty, small place, and my parents worked like crazy to put food on the table. It was tough times, but we shared a room together, like 5 of us, like in one room. And it wasn't a room, actually. It was like kind of like a big open space that we put like bunks, and it was pretty funny. Like, I mean, I think about it now, I'm like, wow, I really live the good life now. But it was kind of punk rock, to be completely honest with you, because there was bed to foot. So it was like perpendicular beds. And there was 5 beds in this small room that could have easily just been one little boy's room, but there was 5 beds in one room.
Jesus.
So imagine that. Now, why do I tell you that? Because there were posters. My brothers were 15 and 17. Mike and John were like the diehard getting into hardcore at that time. They were 15 and 17, going to CB's every single weekend. And they would come home with records. They would come home and put posters on the wall. They would come home. I can literally remember my childhood wall. And I'm 8 years old. I had no idea what hardcore music was, but I can remember the New York Hardcore, The Way It Is poster. I can remember Underdog. My brother had an Underdog poster. And I can remember specific posters on the wall, and they were all hardcore bands. At that time, there were magazines. I think it was like Kerrang, and there was another Metal Mania or whatever. And sometimes hardcore bands got like spreads in magazines, like the Cro-Mags, for example. And my brothers would cut those pictures out and make their own like makeshift hardcore walls. Now, I was an 8-year-old kid subliminally being brainwashed to love hardcore. Little did I know, because I would wake up and go to bed, and I would just look at these walls all the time. We also had a record player in that room, and my brothers would play these records. Now, we didn't even have a house. It was an apartment. Imagine that, if they were playing the records, I could hear them. And it was usually when my parents were at work. Now, my parents worked so much that my brothers pretty much took care of me when they weren't home, right? Imagine this 8-year-old kid. They didn't care about, taking care of me. They were 15 and 17. They were in their room playing records. And I would be bothering them to hang out with them. Please let me hang out with you guys. Leave us alone. Leave us alone. I was just a little kid, And it gravitated on me, man. Like, they would come home every Sunday, and they would be like, my brothers, like, my dad would be like, do you guys do any drugs? My brothers were like, no, Dad, you got to see, like, this is like the craziest thing. We're into this. And my brothers would explain to my dad about hardcore music. And I was just a little kid, and I could remember that. So, skipping a few years down the road, my dad would never let me go to shows that young. And he said, when you're 13, I'll let you go with your brothers. And they didn't want to take me anyway, because they were in their element, right? Like, you're 17. You don't want to take your 8-year-old brother and be a babysitter. When I turned 12, here I am now. I'm stealing my brother's records. I'm listening to all their records. I'm scratching all their good vinyl by accident, inadvertently. because I don't know how to use the record player and I'm just being a little kid. My brother has a show at L'Amour's in Brooklyn, and my brother's like, hey, I think you're ready for your first show. And when I tell you, I remember like my eyes lit up. I was like, yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready. Like, can I borrow one of your band shirts? And my brother said, I don't really have any that'll fit you. And I remember he gave me an obituary shirt because that was like the only one that fit. And it was like this like real metal looking obituary shirt, right? And it was like this really fun thing that I was so excited to go to a show that like my brothers were like, you have to be 16 to get into the club. We're going to have to sneak you in. You don't have ID for 16. He's like, don't worry. You know, we know L'Amour's inside out. Like, we're going to sneak you through the back. Don't worry. So they brought me to the show. I get there. I was 12, but I could have probably passed for 9. I mean, I was small. I was skinny. I didn't even look 12. I looked probably 8 or 9. Immediately, like the big steroid looking bouncer at L'Amour's that they always had, like the Guido bouncer. He's like, he can't get in. He's not going in. You know, my brother's like, don't worry. I was all nervous. And they walked me around the block. And about 5 minutes later, they snuck me in through the side. Within the first song, that show, believe it or not, that was 1992. Madball, Crown of Thorns, and Confusion, my brother's old band, and Neglect from Long Island played that show. And it was a wild show, man. It was dangerous. It was violent. My brothers were terrified of me being there. There was like 4 fights. But that was the day I tell this story because that was the day a whole new world opened up to me in a sense that like I walked into that club and I immediately like goosebumps telling the story, like fell in love with the culture, the music, the vibe, like every single thing about it.
What about that made you want to become the singer instead of just playing guitar, bass, or drums?
I always wanted to have something of my own, you know, like so my brothers played bass. My brother Mike played bass. My brother John sang. I took guitar lessons for 2 years when I was 10, like before I went into hardcore, and I could write like power chords, but I couldn't really play. I kind of stopped doing it. So I knew enough to like, you know, play the guitar, but not enough to like play guitar in a band, if that makes sense. I knew I couldn't play guitar, but I wanted to start a band. So my brother Mike told me, he's like, Mark, he goes, when you can't play an instrument, he's like, you sing in a hardcore band. All you got to do is scream. And it was just really funny. And it was just like, what? And he's like, what do you think all these people on these albums are doing? They're screaming. They're just, you know, some of them do it in tone, other ones do it. It's aggression. It's like natural. It's a natural release. You know, this is all art. And you're basically creating art. It could sound however you want it to sound. Hardcore music doesn't need to conform to a certain style. And that was kind of how my brother taught me. So for me, it was more like, I can't play the bass or guitar, but I want to be in a band. So hell, I'm going to just sing. So
when you first got together and sang in a band, like I don't know if it was only Shutdown or if you had another band prior to that, which you could tell me after you answer this. Did you like kind of when you first like just let yourself go and sing, do you kind of step back like, oh shit, that's what I'm going to sound like?
Yeah, totally. It blew my mind. Like freshman year of high school. So now like we can like transition. Like I'm 12 years old. It's the summer and I'm going now starting high school that fall, which is like a big thing. Like, you know, it's like coming of age really. For me, it doesn't seem like it now. My son's in high school, but back then I went to a Catholic elementary school, like parochial school, and then transitioning into like high school was like a whole new world for me. I actually, you know, as a freshman started looking for people in my high school. It was an all boys school. I went to an all boys school, Jesuit school in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn called Severian. Primarily, I went there because I played baseball my whole life growing up, and my dad, it was like the #1 rated baseball school in the city. So my parents sent me to private school so I could play baseball. But after 1 year of baseball, I quit for Shutdown. In that school, the reason I tell you, and I touched on this on one other interview, is one of the first friends I made was Justin Brannon from Indecision. And he was a sophomore, and I was a freshman, and he had dyed hair, and he had Youth of Today buttons on his backpack and straight edge buttons on his backpack. And I was like, I need to hang out with this guy. Like, this is the guy I've been looking for. And he introduced me to some kids that were seniors. So here I am, a freshman, this little guy. I meet Justin, who's a sophomore, and now he introduces me to a slew of people who are seniors in that same school, maybe 10 different kids. All of us were into New York hardcore. And that's kind of, we had a jam session. Justin came, a couple of other guys came that night, and we jammed at this studio called Ace London Studios in Brooklyn. From there, like we actually wrote United at that first rehearsal. And then Justin told me that he couldn't do the band anymore because he was focusing on Indecision. And that's when I found Steve, who also went to my high school, and Jimmy, who was also in the high school. So that was kind of how it all started.
So when you guys got together, and how old are you at this point? 16, 17?
I was actually just turned 15. No, 14, and I would be 15. So I was just turning 15 like that month.
Yeah, that's right. You and me are the same age. So I always do like the one year after. So yeah, 94, you're 15. You start the band. And so like how long does it take between that and then you guys, like, I don't want to jump too far. I mean, like Victory and like what starts happening in the next year or two?
Yeah, so like things happen for us. I like to talk about this because it's like I always tell people like we didn't like just wake up and get signed to Victory. Like we were a full functioning band for 4 years before that, touring and putting demos 7 inches, this, that, and the other. But I basically that summer after that show, my parents began to open up and let me go to more shows. Now I'm in high school, so the freedom is starting to get out there. My dad was in the army, so he was very strict, but at the same time, it was like as you become a man, you earn, the respect and you earn the credibility to be able to go out and stay out late. You kind of have to earn it. So when I was in high school, I told my dad I was straight edge, and I said, Dad, I'm not into drugs. I don't drink. I'm really into this music. I love this culture. And, I'm starting my band and my band is Shutdown. And my dad thought it was so cool. And my dad's like, okay, what do you need from me? I said, I just want you to tell me I can go to the shows and, I promise, like, whatever you tell me to be home, I'll be home. And my dad's like, done. You got my approval, And I remember having this conversation with my dad. My mom was always like reverting it to my dad because her answer was always no. My dad was like, okay, let's see how it works, So I think from that conversation, I started going to like every single show that there was. I mean, I could tell you, like, if there was a show in the city, it didn't have to be a big show. Like, I was at the show. I became like enthralled with all things hardcore music, carpooling with kids to go to shows at the Pipeline in New Jersey. And what I would do at that time is we had a demo and we recorded a demo. We made about 200 demos, and I would take the demos, we paid for them ourselves, and I would bring them in my JanSport backpack, which I had at that time, and I would just hand them out to people. And I would literally, I had no problem walking up to a complete stranger, giving them my demo and saying, hey, check this out. We're a New York hardcore band. We're a young New York hardcore band. That is literally how I started like getting our name out. Maybe like, I don't know, a dozen shows into going to shows doing this, I saw Rick from 25 to Life, who at that time was like the ultimate distro. He said to me, what are you guys' plans? Like, I'm starting this label called Back to Basics Records, and I want to put your 7-inch out. He goes, I want to do You and Indecision. I want it to be my second release. My first release is going to be, I think it was Crutch, and you guys could be my second release. And he was like, are you in? I was like, hell yeah, we're in. Let's do it. That came probably within about 6 months of us starting the band. And then once that split 7-inch came out, we started seeing that like Rick had so much distribution at that time that like, just those two songs, like we started noticing like people had this, and we started playing all these different shows, and it really is like almost like a kind of like the butterfly effect from there, because everything just kind of like spreads out. Like you just start meeting so many people at once, and you start to meet people that everybody's like you, and it's like, wow, I really love these people. Like everybody's super cool, and they're not like me. Like they don't look like me, they don't talk like me. We just all share the same love. I started making friends and networking, and I really feel like pre-social media, like pre all these like digital marketing and all this, I feel like I was like the expert ultimate like marketing person for my band, because I went to every show, I gave out free music, I made copies of flyers, and it's almost like a long lost art now because of the way technology's advanced, but like I was very hands-on with Shutdown, and I feel like now that I look back at it, I think that had a hand in why we did well back then.
Well, one thing too, so I mean, I was gonna say like I'm sure it sounds like you're massively charismatic, and just walking up to people when you're not selling them something like, here, take this for free, and you're also a part of it. You're living the straight edge life, like you're embedded in that whole thing. So that's going to come across to people. And then so I guess those leading to my question is going to be, you love that lifestyle up there. You love all these bands. When you start hearing what you're putting out as a band, like, were you confident when you're walking around and giving the tape out to people? Like, yeah, I believe that we fit in this whole thing.
Not at all. I thought we were terrible.
No shit.
I really thought we were terrible. I more so wanted people to see that we were young, that we loved the music, and that we wanted to grow as a band. Like that split 7-inch, like it's like noise to my ears sometimes, because we really, I mean, so like nowadays it's different. Like, you're a musician and you start a band. I got to tell you, like, we didn't even necessarily know what we were doing when we started the band. The idea was to come together for the love of the music and create art and music together. But it wasn't like, we weren't looking for like the best guitar player or the best bass player, or the best drummer. Jimmy, our drummer, was a bass player before he was a drummer. He was just teaching himself drums. Steve had only been playing guitar for like a year before he joined the band. And Dion was in a band called Muddlehead. And same thing, like you're talking about, like between the four of us, like I had never picked up a mic, and those three guys hadn't even touched their instruments maybe for more than 2-3 years. When I thought, like, the thing with Shutdown, when I look back at it now, is we got a lot of people that were into us, I think because we were young, and now I'm looking at it now, I'm like, how cool is that? Like if I see a band like reaching out, like 15 years old and these kids are just going to shows, I think it's awesome. But I also think like, I didn't think necessarily we were really that good. It was more along the lines of like, put your stuff out there to everybody and just see who likes it and whatnot. You know what I mean? So it's like, it was just one of those things. But I feel like if you ask a lot of band people what they think of a specific record, like I could tell you like the same thing with Against All Odds. Like it's hard for me to listen to because it's I love some of the songs, but it's like we wrote those songs in the studio because Victory was like pushing us to put out a full length. So it's like nowadays like we're writing a new record now and it's very different. It's very methodic and it's very, we want to put this riff here. We want to create this kind of vibe in this song, and it's very well thought out. But back then, I appreciate the fact that it was very raw. Like there was no thought process. We weren't trying to sound like Agnostic Front. We weren't trying to sound like Madball. It was literally like, let's just plug in, play, and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean that's like kind of how I remember when I first heard you guys. Because my buddy Bob, he had showed me the CD when he was in like college. He's like, dude, you gotta check this fucking band out. And this guy's voice is like, it's like he just sounds just pissed. And it was so raw. It's such a raw sounding. So I was listening to it again before we started talking, and there was such a rawness to it. But your voice stood out for me because of it didn't really. It was screaming, but it was like a higher pitched voice. And it stood out from the other like Victory bands or like the hardcore bands that like the deeper things like that.
Didn't all sound the same because a lot of things at that time, if you had this deep screaming voice and heavy riffs, chances are you sounded like somebody else.
I think that like worked in your guys' favor.
Definitely.
Totally. Again, it made you stand out from those other bands. If someone's listening to a compilation, they'd be like, "Oh, who the fuck is that band?"
And it's funny. It's like I hear bands now, and I talked about this on another podcast in the UK that I did, and it's like I love hardcore music. Like I truly love all kinds of music. Like I could talk to you about pop punk, by the way, as much as I could talk to you about hardcore, because that's kind of like a hidden love that everybody knows about me. But like with hardcore music, it's different in the sense that back then I could tell you like it was rough for me because like when Victory put our first record out, they were all in on us, which was cool. Like we got the full, marketing, publicity. Now they were coming off of, doing very well with Snapcase, Earth Crisis, and Strife. All three of those bands were already on their second album when we got signed. They were at a point, Victory was at a point where they could kind of like do it on their own and just promote to the masses. And they actually signed a distribution deal with Sony through Red Distribution. That's how Victory got all their stuff. And like in every record store, like you would go to the mall and see Victory stuff, but you could also get it in like a mom and pop. And I think that a lot of people, like, they would send me all the reviews. So, like, Victory had this street team back then. And I'll tell you, like, I must have did 50 interviews a day for weeks on end when the record came out. We were on the road, and I would have to go to a payphone because there were no cell phones. And I would literally have to sit on the payphone for, like, 3 hours. I would call into the 800 number at Victory. And, like, the radio, the A&R guy at Victory would be like, okay, stay on the phone. You're going to do the college radio station in Nebraska. Then you're going to do the one in Atlanta. Then you're going to do – and it was like Victory was great about that stuff. Now, the reason I say that is there was a lot of people – they would share all the reviews with me, good and bad, and we got like so many negative reviews, and none of it was substance. Like it was all like his voice sounds too young. Like it wasn't like – there wasn't a breakdown or critique of the music. It was just his voice sounds too high-pitched. And I look now and I'm like – I always think to myself, I say – I in no way compare myself to these bands, but just in terms of like a higher tone voice, Knocked Loose, or even in a weird way, Brandon from Turnstile has a very high pitched voice.
Yeah.
And somebody came up to me a few years ago and was like, I just wonder if Shutdown was out in this era and you were young and it was like you kind of like you were 17 now and starting Shutdown, would it be embraced more based on the fact, because like I look like Knocked Loose is obviously huge, so is Turnstile, but it's like there was a lot of bands that sounded like that back then that did not necessarily blow up like that, if that makes sense. And that's not a knock on them because I think they're a great band, but you know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, it's through time, people get a bit more, if you're introducing it, people are kind of caught off guard.
Correct. So it's like, I just wonder, sometimes I go through this and I say, I just wonder like if we were 17 now and started, would I get more shit for the high pitched voice or would I get less? And would people like embrace it?
But I liked you guys because of that, because it did sound like you guys were younger, even though we were the same age. Like it sounded like to me, I mean, anything back then when you're going to punk shows is because you felt like there was no separation of you and the stage. Like you could do what you were seeing on stage, especially if you wanted to play in a band and stuff.
Totally, totally. That's what motivates you. I think that's what motivates everybody. Exactly.
But like when I heard you guys, I was like, this sounds so raw, and it sounds like the fact that he sounds younger. There's like it kind of made me like it more because there was like this kind of like like I wouldn't say rooting because that sounds like it's like watering you guys down, but it's kind of like fuck yeah, I want this band to like, I like the songs and also I'm rooting for them because I want them to like, I don't know.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. And let me tell you, like, the coolest part, and we're the same age, and you said that, and it sparked something in me to remember, because I don't think I appreciated at that time. There were so many kids our age, right? Like, not the guys who were in their mid-20s and late 20s who came to our shows, but there were kids who were like, at that time, so when Against All Odds dropped, we toured like nonstop. We had, Victory set us up with like a booking agent and a tour manager. And it was basically like, you guys want to do these records, we expect you to be on the road and doing this as a profession, basically. That was like the agreement we basically verbally made with Victory. Of course, that was the dream for us, right? So it was like, okay, so we're going to get to tour all the time? It's cool, where do we sign,
Yeah.
That was like our mentality. At no point did we think of money. Like, I'm telling you the truth, like at no point did any kind of money enter our brain at that moment, like even in the first tour of Victory. And I think about it now and I'm like, we had to put like our trailer on my guitar player's mother's credit card and pay her at the end of the tour. And Victory gave us like a box of CDs to support the tour. It wasn't like, I'm not knocking them, but I'm just saying like it was rough, but it was the element of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It was just different. And now I think there's kids our age, I say you and I, who are in our 40s, that I come to me through Facebook, through social media or Instagram, and they're like, yo, when I was 17, we met, we didn't like hang out, but like we met, I was at your show. One kid sent me something. He was in LA and he posted like a ticket stub and he was like, Mark, I know you probably don't remember this show, but I was 16 when I went to the show. It was my second hardcore show. 6 months after that, I started a band. And a year later, my band got signed. 2 years later, we were touring the world. It was all because I went to your show when I was 16. And it was like the coolest shit ever. Meanwhile, this guy was in like a semi-big band, and I had never even known that this guy in this band was that person. And I won't mention the band, but the band is very well known. And I was like, it blew my mind, to be honest with you.
Can you tell me and I won't put it into the podcast?
Yeah, it was, but stuff like that motivates the fuck out of me. And when I told the guys, they were like a little blown away by it, like, really, that band? And it was like, and the kid told me, he's not a kid, he's our age now, but he told me, he's like, Mark, you guys played a Mexican restaurant in outside of Detroit. And there was like 8 kids there. Well, I was one of those kids there. It was my second show. And he's like, I started a band like 2 weeks later.
Think about it, dude. I mean, that's the same way that you did it. Your brothers sneak you into a show and you're 12 looking like you're 8 and you saw fucking like Madball and whoever else, and you're just like, oh, I'm in this world now.
100%, like 100%. The reason I met this guy is we were I went to see Craig is one of my good friends, and I went to see Sick of It All at Warped Tour down in Florida. And of course, Craig is he's like a comedian. Like, it's like I can't hang out with him without laughing the whole day. So he was trying to get me to shave my head that day. It's funny, he got me to shave my head like 2 months later, but he was bringing me around to like all the different bands in the backstage of the Warped Tour. And I didn't even know some of the bands. And he was like, Mark, take off your hat. I just want to give him a good shot. And like, I would indulge just to be laughing. And he's like, what do you think? Should he shave it or not? And I would have this like little bald spot in the middle of my head. And it'd be like, oh, you got to shave that shit, man. So it was just such a fun day. And I think it was the 2017 Warped Tour. And anyhow, this kid in this band came onto their tour bus. And Craig is like, oh, Mark? And Craig's like, and he's like, no, hey, nice to meet you. And he's like, wait a minute. He's like, Mark from Shutdown? And he's like, yeah. He's like, and he told me that story on the bus. And Craig looks at me. He's like, oh boy, you got to get the band back together, bro. I ain't hearing stories like this. Like, come on, man, you're wasting your life away. So it's kind of funny. Like, life comes full circle.
So you guys you're playing for about 4 years, and you said that people didn't realize that you had been around for so long before you got in Victory. And obviously I want to talk about Victory just because of just like Victory being known, and we don't have to like break them apart because I know Victory is this weird stigma and shit. But like, how did you guys get found by them or Tony?
By playing so Raybeez died in September. He actually died on September 11th, 1997. And Steve Pass, who's passed away as well, unfortunately, and Jimmy Gestapo from Murphy's Law had Creepy Crawl Productions. They were they booked shows at Coney Island High in Manhattan. They knew I was close with Ray. And when Ray died, they did 2 weekends of shows at CBGB's. The first weekend was Agnostic Front, Madball, Agnostic Front, Madball, Murphy's Law, Crown of Thorns. And the second Sunday, following Sunday, was the October 10th and October 17th. October 17th was Gorilla Biscuits, Civ, Sick of It All, Bouncing Souls, Rejuvenate, and Shutdown. I mean, it was like my dream show to play with the Gorilla Biscuits at CB's. And by the way, it was Civ, and the big secret was that Gorilla Biscuits were going to jump up and do a set. I knew this before they announced it, and I was like, as a kid, I got to tell you, like I couldn't, oh my God. So we went, and they were my favorite band at that time. So we went, and it was completely sold out. The show's on YouTube. We had some crazy shows at CB's prior to Victory. We're very thankful for all the friends that we made. Like a lot of Long Island kids embraced Shutdown early on, a lot of Queens kids, a lot of Bronx kids, and of course our Brooklyn friends. So like when we played the city, I feel like a lot of those different cliques came together, and we always had like these like massively fun shows at CBGB's, and the videos are all up on YouTube. But after the show, this guy comes up to us, and we had a great show. We closed the set. I remember it's on YouTube. We closed the set with Filler by Minor Threat. The entire crowd is singing. I mean, you could literally pull it up and the whole crowd is singing the words. And it, you know, it's something I'll never forget. And right after we got off the stage, this guy comes up to me, you know, he looks like a punk rocker and, you know, fairly well dressed, but like a regular hardcore guy. And he said, hey, here's my card. I'm John Regan. He goes, are you guys free tomorrow? Can you get together? And on his card, it said artist A&R Victory Records. So I looked at the guys. I was like, oh, shit. Now, what you don't know is that 6 months before this, I made a home video, and I still have a copy. And my friend remember at that time you had that one friend that had a VHS burner so he could make copies of videos?
Yep.
And this is like, now you know we're really old.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So what we did was we went to Staples, because there was no Kinko's or Office Depot at that time. This was when Staples was around. And we went and we made black and white photocopies. We made DIY covers, and we bought video box cases. So basically I made like a makeshift home video, and I have a copy of it here. And I wrote a handwritten letter to 2 record labels, to Victory, actually 3, I'm sorry, Victory, Revelation, and Equal Vision Records. My real dream in life was to be signed to Revelation Records because I was a straight edge kid. I was a diehard Youth of Today Gorilla Biscuits fan. You know, there was no greater record label in the universe than Revelation at that time to me, my 15-year-old self, right? Victory, of course, I was like loving, you know, Victory was basically running stuff at that time because she had Earth Crisis and Snapcase and Strife. I think Steps just came out by Snapcase, and it was just like Victory was really taking off, right? I really was hoping Revelation would write me back, but like I sent this video and this handwritten letter that said, hey, my name is Mark, blah, blah, blah. I'm from Brooklyn. Here's our band, Shutdown. All we want to do is tour and put out records. We love this music and we love this culture. And I sent this handwritten letter out, same letter to Victory, to Revelation. I got like Jordan Cooper is the owner of Revelation, and I was able to like get their address. So I knew where to send it. So I knew it would go to him. And Victory, like everybody had the Victory address. So like I just addressed it to Tony Brummel. And I sent one to Steve Evans over at Equal Vision. And
wait, Steve?
Not Steve. Steve. I don't know Steve's last name. Steve Evans is the guy who remasters stuff. Steve from Equal Vision, the guy who owns Equal Vision. His name is Steve as well, not Evans.
Okay.
Sorry, but I didn't get a response, man, and it kind of did. And I wasn't bummed out. I wasn't like, yo, Victory didn't reach out to sign us, you know. But after that Warzone show 6 months later, John Regan goes, "Do you remember that video you sent Tony?" And I go, "Yeah." I go, "He watched it?" And he goes, "Hell yeah, he watched it." He goes, "Raybeez would call him like every day." Tony called Raybeez and said, "Hey, what do you know about this band Shutdown?" And Raybeez would tell Tony every day, "You are crazy if you don't sign these kids. They're young. They want to tour. They want to put records out. You're absolutely out of your mind if you don't sign this band." He goes, "I hate to say we're here now because of Raybeez passed away, but he goes, you know, Tony is very much into the idea now." So the next night we went out to dinner with him. I was a minor. The rest of the guys were technically 18. In 1997, but because of my birthday, if you do the math, my birthday's in September. That show, like, I wasn't 18 yet. I had to sign the contract. I had to have like an adult with me, but we wouldn't sign it that night. Like, he gave us this contract, and I'm super open about this stuff. I don't care. I talk about it all the time. Like, you know, it was basically like for 8 records.
Yeah, I've heard about this.
You look at it at first, and you're like, oh my God, an 8-record deal. But that's not necessarily, like, when you look at it on the surface, you don't understand. What they're really saying is they want to basically tie you up. And no matter what happens to you, you're going to be kind of like at their service for as long as you put out records, right? I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. After Raybeez' funeral, before these shows, I had met Roger Moret. And I had just met Roger by going to Raybeez' funeral, which was a few weeks before these shows, like his actual funeral. I had met a lot of the guys that I never met before. I never met Roger until that funeral. I never met Jimmy Gestapo until around that time. But Raybeez was like very close with me. He was the guy that was telling all these guys about these young kids named Shutdown. So I was like a kid after he died going to this funeral where people would meet me and Roger would go like, man, Raybeez always talked about you. I hope you know that. And I remember crying at his funeral and being like, are you serious? He's like, yeah, he loved you guys. Like you represented the next generation of something he helped build. And Roger was like, anything you need, always call me. So when we got this record contract, I called Roger and I said, Roger, it's Mark from Shutdown. He's like, oh, he always called me kid. He goes, what's up, kid? And I was like, I hate to bother you, but I'm like, Victory sent us this contract and I don't know what to do. I'm like, he's like, how many records do they want to sign you for? And I'm like, 8. And he was like, no fucking way. I will never. He's like, Mark, no, tell them no. And I was like, man, I don't want to not be on Victory. What do we do? We're just kids, you know? And he was like, listen, he's like, you know, we have a guy in our scene, a hardcore guy. His name is Dave Stein. And Dave is one of the OG hardcore people from the upstate New York scene. He booked bands. He booked Black Flag in upstate New York in the early 80s. You know, like he's an OG. He's a lawyer for one of the biggest firms in New York at that time. I think it was Pryor, Cashman, and Flynn or one of those firms. But he was an entertainment lawyer. And Roger said that as Roger said, he's one of us. So he said, let him handle your contract. You know, he's not going to take all your money. It'll be like a very small percent, you know, whatever it costs, a couple $1,000, whatever. But it was worth it. And he got it knocked down to a 3-record deal. And it took like a lot of negotiating from him and all this stuff. Like it wasn't easy. It took like a month before we actually signed the contract. I mean, at one point he actually said, he goes, look, Tony wants to sign you guys forever. It's not a good move. You guys are young. You don't know what's going to happen with this band. He's like, I never encourage bands to do that. I would never encourage you guys to do that. But we didn't want to like, as funny as it sounds, like we didn't want to like scare Victory away to the point where like we wouldn't have any record deal, right? We were young. We didn't know better. So Dave helped us out and we got like a small signing bonus and it actually paid for the lawyer. And like we didn't get any money, like it paid for the lawyer, right? But in our face, it was worth it because we got it knocked down to 3 records. And that's how we got on Victory. I mean, we went into the studio. That was November of 97. We went into the studio 2 months later with Jimmy Gestapo in January with 4 songs written and spent 3 weeks in the studio and wrote 10 more songs in the studio with like an array of New York hardcore all-stars that would just like pop in as friends of Jimmy throughout the process.
Jesus.
And I just gave you a long-winded version. I apologize, but like that's kind of how it worked.
That's the point of podcasts. Is like this is a very elongated conversation, which is great. I want to talk about, because you had mentioned before you had to write 10 songs in the studio. I want to jump back to that, but before that, like through the years and kind of maybe jumping ahead, have you ever, when you guys were on the road at that time, being signed to Victory and then playing shows with other Victory bands, did you guys ever kind of like huddle together and say, hey, did you guys also try to get this shit deal too?
100%. Yeah. Everywhere we met a Victory band, few people got sucked into that 8-record deal. Let's put it that way. Unfortunately, I think some of the earlier, more successful Victory bands, not knowingly, maybe it wasn't 8 records, maybe it was 6, but a lot of them were tied in. I mean, it's one of those things where you don't really have a crystal ball. Who knew? Like, Victory just happened to be that label at that time, you know? Now it's other labels, you know, Triple B Records is now. And, you know, in the mid-2000s, it was, what's it called, out of Boston? You know, the label that put out H2O, Nothing to Prove, and all that other stuff, that Death Before Dishonor. To be on Victory for us, yes, we used to meet other bands. Now, understand that Snapcase Strife Earth Crisis was like the big wave, and we were part of the second wave. So the second wave, there was a demo that Victory put out, and you remember Victory was, if you remember this about Victory, they were big into promotion. Like you would go to a show and there'd be Victory promo cassettes being thrown around, like always Victory CDs being floating around the crowd. So they put a tape together, and somebody posted this on IG. I wish I had a copy. And it says, Victory, the Next Generation. And it's a tape from 1998, January of 1998. And it's Hatebreed. It's a 4-song tape. It's Hatebreed, Shutdown, Bloodlet, and Blood for Blood. And it says Victory, the Next Generation on it. And we each have a song in it. And it's each of our songs from those albums. That was more our family of bands. Like we were that new, we toured with Hatebreed, Off Satisfaction is a Death of Desire, which was an amazing tour for us. Probably the first big tour we ever did, to be honest with you, like in terms of like playing sold out crowds every night. We got close with them really quick because they got signed to Victory in like, I want to say 6 months before us. and they put out that record. Satisfaction is the Death came out November of 97. They were like literally like our record came out March of 98. So we were like in that batch of new records, right? We would always talk to Hatebreed and always talk to Blood for Blood and toured with them and what kind of deal did you guys get with Tony? And it's kind of funny to find out every band got a different deal.
Oh, I can imagine. I'm sure there's, the labels, they're like, what can we get away with for this band or this band? And then they try it. And it really, at the end of the day too, like you mentioned it was 17, 18-year-old that they had to pay a couple $1,000s for a lawyer. I'd say like 99% of them were like, oh, we don't want to spend that much money. I'm thinking
about it now and just to put it into perspective, my son's going to be 15. And I'm like, man, I was like 17, like we were trying to like negotiate a record contract. Like it's pretty nuts.
It's crazy, dude. You look at any 17-year-old now, like you said, and you're going, they're making business decisions. Like, and then labels know that too.
It really does. And I didn't think of it at that time. Like I'm only 17. I can't do this. Like we were just like, no, fuck no. Like the sky's the limit.
Yeah, and Bridge 9, I think, is the label you were trying to
Bridge 9, thank you. Man, sorry. No disrespect to Bridge 9 because I love those guys, but like, yeah, Bridge 9. Like, so like, I feel like every era of hardcore has had that one label that kind of stood out. Bridge 9 definitely in the mid 2000s and early 2000s. Now it seems to be like Triple B is putting out a lot of big stuff. There's always going to be an era. That Victory era for me is a really special era, not just because we were a part of it, but because that was a part of my upbringing. Even if you take Shutdown out of the entire equation, Snapcase, Strife, Earth Crisis were like my three favorites back then.
So that to that point, this is a question I wrote down earlier. And did California Takeover come out before you guys got on Victory?
Yeah, it was like right around the time. It was recorded before we were on Victory, and it came out right around the time we were on Victory.
Okay, because the question I was going to ask, which I'll just say, I was going to be like, did you see that record and think like, God damn it, I wish we could have been on that?
I love that record. Like I hear that we would hear that record like our first tour. Like first of all, we toured a lot before Against All Odds, like a ton. But I would say like the full-time touring thing where like we didn't go to school, like we dropped everything and this was like how we made a living, for many years. Started off Against All Odds. Against All Odds got released in March of 98, March 24th, 1998. April 9th, 1998 was the first day of our 7-week US tour, which started at Wetlands, which was like a sold out record release show at Wetlands with Indecision and Fahrenheit. And it ended 7 weeks later somewhere in the West Coast. And then from there, we went to Japan. And then we flew back to LA from Japan and drove all the way from LA back to New York and then spent like 2 weeks home. And then we took my brother's band Inhuman out in the summer and did a whole nother 8-week headlining US tour. Came home for a week, drove from Brooklyn to Sacramento, California. So now this is our second drive from LA. This time it was from Brooklyn to Sacramento, California. Hatebreed was on tour with Kid Rock. Hatebreed did the Warped Tour in 1998, excuse me. And this was like, if you remember how big Hatebreed was when they were just blowing up.
Oh yeah.
I mean, compared to now, they're bigger now, but you remember the vibe when that record came out? They did Warped Tour that summer. We didn't. And then from Warped Tour, Kid Rock took them on tour. And that was when Kid Rock had like, #1 record on MTV and all that bullshit. So they were doing like really big things and they were doing a headlining tour after that stopped. So bands would jump on these like big tours, like Hatebreed got on that Kid Rock tour, but it was for like 2 weeks and then they started their own tour in Sacramento. And that was with us in Willhaven. And we drove to Sacramento from Brooklyn and started that tour, and that was another 6 weeks. So the summer of 98, I want to say we may have been home for 10 days total in 4 months.
I think I saw you guys. I know I saw you guys. I don't know if it was 98 or 99, but you guys played at it was called Skate Zone in.
I know Skate Zone, yeah.
Yeah, in West Orange, New Jersey.
Of course.
I was at that show when you guys played on the roller rink.
I totally remember that. Show, yeah. Didn't one of the dudes in Bigwig book that club?
Probably, I think.
Because we were friends with them.
Josh, possibly. Josh was doing a lot of. First, Josh, he was booking a lot of shows around New Jersey.
Yeah, they were good dudes, and I remember like the OS 101 dude, Skip.
That I don't know. I'm not
okay,
sure.
So OS 101 was like the dudes that used to hang out with all those dudes, and Skip, the singer from OS 101, he had like long blonde dreadlocks, very distinguished look, like you would recognize him in a minute if you saw him. We used to come to Jersey and play with those bands, and like it was fun, man, because the Shutdown was really cool because like we could go to Jersey and play like a show with Bigwig, and then we could go and play a show with Hatebreed. That was the beauty of our band. We never wanted to sound like one band. Like we didn't want to just sound like this beatdown style band or this heavy band. Nothing wrong with that, but we also didn't want to sound like we were a ripoff of Gorilla Biscuits. Like we were always trying to create we put all of our influences in a blender, and literally that's how we created our band. Because you talk about Tool, like my guitar player's favorite band in the world is Tool. That was like his biggest influence, but he, when we came together, it was like Dion, our bass player, he's more madball. He's very into like bouncy, heavy stuff. And then Jimmy is into more death metal, but he loves Youth Crew hardcore. A guy that loves, you don't see that. Like the guy loves Obituary and all this death metal stuff, and then he loves Youth Crew hardcore. So I feel like with Shutdown, like we could blend into anything. Like that's why when we went on Warped Tour, we were pretty heavy for Warped Tour at that time. Like there wasn't Warped Tour later years was like this metal stuff, but that year there was like, I remember like the bands that went on before us. I still have the bands. We were like, it was like Pepper went on before us and it was a reggae band, and like a ska band went on after us on the side stage every day. But it was cool because it was like that Warped Tour, like we made so many new kids, got so many new kids into us. And that's why I was so bummed out, because I was like, we did so well on that Warped Tour. And the way it works on Warped Tour is like, you don't have the same slot every day. So it's kind of like Russian roulette. Like one day you might be playing on the big stage before Rancid, and one day you might be playing at 12 p.m. on the side stage. And we did both. We actually got to do both. Like, the first show was in Buffalo, and we're like, hey, we showed up at the last leg of the tour. So all these bands were together for 6 weeks, and we're on the last 2 weeks. So it's like the friendships, the bonds. We knew some of the bands, but everyone was kind of like the brotherhoods were already made, right? And we were just like the new kids on the block. So we came, and I remember we played Buffalo, and they're like, you guys go on in 10 minutes. And we're like, what? It's 12 o'clock. They're like, yeah, no, you're on first band on the side stage. There's like 80 bands playing that day. Kids are literally not even walking in yet, And then we were so bummed about it. We were like, oh, I hope it's not like this every day. Is this what we've been waiting for the whole summer? And then the next day we go to Montreal, and like we look at the times, and we're playing right before Rancid on the side stage. And I'm like, holy shit. And Rancid was like headlining, and we were on at like 5 p.m. And the way they did it back then is like bands didn't play at the same time. I know they changed it up a little, but like if main stage went on, the side stage went, like main stage went off, side stage went on. There was a little stage besides that, like the Ernie Ball stage or whatever, but it was like, man, we played in front of, I don't want to say 10,000 people that day. It was crazy. There's a picture of the crowd, and it just blows my mind.
Jeez,
so it was like
Christ.
The next day we played Boston, and I think they put us on before Flogging Molly. And it was like insane, So it was like, we only really got like 2 bad slots out of that run. But the reason I mentioned that Warped Tour is because it was the last tour we did, and we met so many new kids. Like we'd sold so much merch on that tour. It was crazy because there was so many kids coming up to us. Like that is the perfect tour at that time. Maybe not what it represented now, but at that time that was the perfect tour to get a different group of kids into your music.
So to that point, like, because you had said few and far between, you had a little bit more time to do that record than you did for Against All Odds, right?
Much more, yeah.
So then, like, when that comes out, so if this is your last tour, Few and Far Between comes out in 2000, right?
Right. It came out September 12th, 2000. So we toured basically for a full year for Few and Far Between.
But when did you do Warped Tour, though? Was that 2001?
Summer 2001, yeah. Our last tour off of Few and Far Between was the Warped Tour, summer 2001.
So your second record comes out of the 3 you're supposed to put up for Victory.
Right. We put an EP in between.
Okay, so then you got like three records out, well, 2.5 records out, and you finally get the second one out, the second LP out, and you're touring on that, and like I'm guessing the tours just kept getting bigger and bigger.
Yes, yeah, and now there's like a game plan, right? So now we're 21. Jimmy and Steve are actually 22, turning 23, and now we're actually putting the game plan together for Few and Far Between. We now had like a playbook of how we wanted to do this in terms of how we wanted to hit the road, which was really cool. So now after Against All Odds, we kind of like laid the groundwork, and now it was, we did about 4 support tours off Against All Odds around the whole US, and we did like maybe 2 headlining tours in small venues, and we took friends out on those tours. But now with Few and Far Between, Victory was all about pumping the promotion for this record. They asked us at that time, it's kind of cheesy now, but at that time it was big, like in-stores were like a big thing, like the Tower Records and all these things. And they set us up to do in-stores at these local record stores everywhere we played. So like when we toured, in Idaho, we did an in-store at the Idaho record store. And like all the kids who went to the show would show up to the record store and hang out with us. And like we did all this promotional stuff. So we had like a map of Few and Far Between from the inception of when we recorded it in June. In September, it came out in 2000, and we basically had a roadmap of what we wanted to do. And the roadmap was basically tour the world off this record. and we had the plan to do it, and we did it. So that record, we started touring. My 21st birthday show was September 29th, 2001 at L'Amour's in Brooklyn. That was the record release for Few and Far Between. Excuse me, 2000, not 2001.
Yeah, I was going to say, that must have been an interesting birthday.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so 2000. So the record came out September 12th, 2000. We had our first show of that tour, which was our record release party at L'Amour's, September 29th, which was also my 21st birthday. We left for tour that day with One King Down. One King Down, they were supporting us, but really it was like a co-headlining tour because they were doing really well at that time. We never looked at it like that, and they were our best friends. So us and One King Down went on a 6-week tour, and that started like a full year of touring. We came home from that U.S. tour. That was a good headlining tour for us. Venues were pretty packed. Us and One King Down, I don't know that I've ever made better friends with a band in my life than with those guys. They're still very dear friends of ours. Lots of good memories, but we basically hit about 40 cities on that tour. So we started in New York, we went all the way down to Florida, and then we did the proverbial square around the country, going west, up the West Coast. I mean, we went as far as Seattle, Portland, California. I want to say in 40 cities we covered, I could be wrong, but I think we covered 35 states. So yeah, so that was a crazy tour. When we came home from that tour, we went back to Japan. So we had this whole roadmap. We toured heavily off Few and Far Between, almost to the point where I tell you we were only home for the holidays from September of 2000 to August of 2001. There was no time home with our families, zero. Like it was like, come home for a week, get some sleep, see you at the airport. We're going to Japan next week. We went to Japan, we came home. We went to Europe 2 weeks later. We went to Europe for 2 months. We came home from Europe. We went back to Japan and for a third time, and this time we went to New Zealand and Australia. And we toured the world. We were very lucky, toured all of Canada. And Few and Far Between, I would say, in a 365-day calendar year, we logged about 230 shows that year.
That's fucking insane.
Yeah, like literally. And by the way, I have records of all this stuff.
Jeez.
We played over 200 shows that year. And when I tell you that we played some insanely big shows to the smallest of small shows, I mean, we didn't care. And it was a great year for us. But I will tell you that physically and mentally, it took its toll on a lot of, on us being our age. It did, That's
where I was leading to, because in the beginning of this, the very first thing you said when I was telling you about, just share whatever you want, you go, I think you said this way, you said this is when Harley wanted to kill you?
Yeah, that was part of that story, yeah.
Okay, so leading up to that, so that made me triggered to ask you, what was the inner dynamic of the band in the van when you guys are on the road for so long?
It was really good. We were very close. We were all best friends. We often only took roadies out who were our very close friends, right? So they weren't really like professional roadies. They were just our friends, selling our merch, carrying the equipment, right? We were very good friends. At the same time, we were living together every day. We shared a bed in every hotel. I mean, in a hardcore band, you get one hotel room. If you're fortunate enough and you're not sleeping on somebody's couch, you stay in a hotel. It's 2 double beds and 6 people. We had 4 of us and 2 roadies. The roadies always slept on the floor, and sometimes we were nice that we would split the bed or whatever. Steve actually preferred to sleep on the floor. We were very close. Towards the end, I think the changes in the band were just that we were getting to a different level, and things were becoming way more serious to the point where I think even families started getting involved. Like, yeah, where are you guys taking this? Like Japan's awesome, Australia's awesome. You made a little bit of money in Europe, but what are you guys' plans? What do you want to do? And of course, it was very clear for me. I want to keep putting records out. I want to keep touring. For them, it was yes and no. I didn't have pressure to pay any rent in my house or anything like that. Like my dad had an apartment, and my dad thought it was the coolest thing that we were in a band and on tour. I mean, he didn't care what the music was. He was just like, my dad loved music, and he was just like, hey, my kid's on tour, So when I came home, I really didn't have to pay any bills or anything like that. Like, I just lived on the road. Some of the other guys were a little bit older, and their parents wanted them to finish college. It was a pressure thing where it was like, you don't have to go back to school, but if you don't go back to school, you have to support yourself. And I don't think we were in a position to live on our own. We weren't making nearly enough money to say all of us have our own apartments and pay our own bills to do Shutdown at that time.
That's such a telling sign about, and this isn't turning into shitting on victory thing, but it's very telling about bands just in general killing themselves, and you can't even fucking you can't even pay rent.
I mean, literally. I mean, listen, we toured. I just told you we played over 200 shows that year, right?
Yeah.
And the summer of 2001 is kind of when I'm not gonna, it's a couple of the guys' parents in the band. Remember, we've been the same 4 guys forever. So it's like, yes, we were a very tight-knit group. Our parents were friends. It was a big Shutdown family kind of, when we were on tour, the parents were commingling, calling each other. Did you hear from them today? Again, there were no cell phones, very few. Steve had one maybe in 2000, but in 1998, 1999, they had their 18-year-old children touring the country in a van with no adult. Like the oldest person in the van was 20 years old, and we're playing 40 cities around the country. Like they were pretty terrified, My brothers were like calming my parents down, like, it's all part of the music. Just let it go. He'll be fine. He's straight edge. But, I think there was pressure to go back to school. Some of the guys had 2 years done already, so they already had their associates, but their parents really wanted to see them get their bachelors. And the guys basically came to me and they were like, look, we can't afford to live on our own. So if we have to live with our parents, we're just going to go back to school this semester. So the fall semester of 2001, two of the guys decided to go back, and eventually the third. And I was just so hurt by that because we were still touring. Like we were a year off of Few and Far Between, but we were also, we were getting offered really big tours. Like we were just offered a tour with Biohazard and DRI in Europe. And Biohazard was really big in 2000 in Europe, or 2001. And, we would have been on a tour bus. It was like a really cool tour. And I was like, guys, forget school. Let's go back to Europe. We got the Biohazard tour, Now, if there was a place you could make a little bit of a living, it was Europe, because you do come home, and if there was ever a time where I made any money in the band, it was usually Europe, just because kids buy merch like crazy. It ties into the passion that I said at the beginning of the interview. And kids are just so passionate. They'll buy 4 or 5 of your shirts. One kid will buy every design of your shirt in a Europe show. Now, times that by like 400 or 500 kids at a show, you sell tons of merch in Europe, and that's your bread and butter. I thought going back to Europe made sense, and I even created a way for them to say, hey, financially, we can make this work. But it was a lot of peer pressure from their parents. We're all pretty close with our parents. We all have good parents, good families that brought us up well. They took care of us. That none of us really come from that that unfortunate background. We weren't. None of us came up well off. But just tight, loving, supportive families is what I'm saying. The guys went back to school. I did not want to go back to school. So I moved to Florida, and I started living on the beach and kind of hanging out for a few months to try to figure out what I was going to do next.
Wait, when you say you lived on the beach, were you just on the
Oh, no. So I lived, my grandparents, they both passed away, but in 2001 they lived down in Florida, in South Florida. I needed a break. My dad said to me, Mark, you've been touring for a year. I mean, we literally, again, 230 shows in a year. So my dad said to me, you need a break. I think all you guys, this was my dad's take on it. You guys just need a break. Just take a 2-month break. I mean, there's no reason you did your 12 months in a row of touring, all Few and Far Between. Take a break. So my dad's thing was the guys will come back around in January. Don't worry about it. We didn't tell people we broke up. We were just not on tour. And because we really didn't break up in our eyes. The guys kept saying, and we're going on hiatus for a few months. And then January came around, but I went to Florida to see my grandparents, and my grandparents lived a mile away from the beach in Lake Worth. I literally would just wake up in the morning and go take a towel and literally just go lay on the beach every day. And I did 3 months of just chilling, really, to be honest with you. Kind of depressed, I guess, because I was really down that I wanted to be on the road.
Oh, I can imagine. You want to be on the road, and now you're sitting on the beach is not a bad lifestyle, but it's the polar opposite of what you're doing.
Yeah, man. But it was coming down from a reality that I had lived for the last 6 years. The reality was that reality may not be anymore. And it really messed with me because I was really in love with everything we did. It was almost like a breakup, a bad breakup, even though we didn't break up. We didn't have Shutdown as a band. We didn't say we broke up. We didn't it was just kind of we kind of stopped touring. It was very for me, it was very emotional because I felt that we were at the edge of doing something even greater than we did. I thought that we were on the verge of accomplishing the next level. And when I say the next level, no, I'm not talking about, arenas or anything. I'm just talking about there are stages of bands in hardcore where, sometimes you're playing 50 people rooms, sometimes you're playing 200 capacity rooms. And, if you're lucky, you get up to those 300, 400, 500 capacity rooms. And if you get luckier than that, sometimes you just get bigger and bigger. And it's a lot of work. It takes hard work. And we put in the work. So I would call the guys and I would say, guys, what can I do to convince you not to go to school? And they're like, Mark, we're already in the semester. We have to finish the semester. And I'd just say, all the work has been put, why not put another record out? Why not go to the next level? So for me, it was that was kind of the takeaway. And they wind up staying in school in January. And it was just one of those things where it kind of slowly faded away a little bit. Victory called us, I want to say in 2002. And they said, hey, are you guys going to go back into the studio and put another record out? I talked to the guys, and they just felt that we should take now we should take a longer break. Like we should take a break for like a year to see if it's what we want to go do going forward. And that's kind of how Shutdown stopped playing. You know, a lot of people don't know that actual story, but that's the true story of like how we stopped playing. It was never like a bad fight. It was never a bad breakup. It was never, any riff in the band. It was more or less not being able to do it full time on our own and support ourselves financially without the help of our parents.
That's like, it's wild too, because I don't know, man. I mean, were you pissed at all?
Yeah, man. I'm still pissed. No, I bring it up to them now, you know. I meet a lot of people now, and so many people like at the H2O shows. Like, it's kind of like I love talking about it, and I hate talking about it because it's like I know for me, I go on Instagram now, right, and I see the bands putting in work, and it's a very different scene. It was very organic back then, and it's okay now. Like the way it's evolved is just the way technology has evolved and the universe and the world has evolved. It's no different, right? It's like, now you promote your band on IG, right? But I'm watching bands put in the work, like that Pain of Truth band who's just like blowing up out of nowhere. And bands like, all these new bands that are coming out that are just like, these bands are doing great, man. Combust, they've been around for a few years, but they're awesome. They're from New York. And I'm like, and they're really big on social media. Like you go on their Instagram and their social media and like, people love these bands, and it's just like a new way to promote your band. But I can't help but always think, and it's like, this is the stuff that keeps me up late at night sometimes. I'm like, man, what if we didn't stop? What if we kept going? Like, would we be I would hope to say that we would be at a point now where, we'd be 8 to 9 records in and one of these full functioning bands, like, for example, Terror, or older bands like Sick of It All, Agnostic Front, all those bands,
Well, you got to think about it though, man. Like, you've also mentioned that you played about 5 shows between the Warped Tour being your last tour and then present
in 20
day.
years, yeah.
So, and then all those shows, you said how just huge they were, right?
Yeah. Every show we've done since we broke up has been like a big show.
I mean, you got to think about it. Maybe I'm just being not devil's advocate, but being more like you're not saying you're not positive at all in any of this, but like you got to think about it. Let's say it did go on and you did put out the 11 records, then maybe those shows wouldn't happen for you now. So maybe that you guys didn't have that. You get to have those. Like, people don't get to have giant shows like you've had in the last 20 years.
No, I know, and I'm thankful for that too. I really am. Like, I will tell you, like, I feel that with the guys in the band, the other 3 guys, Steve, Jimmy, and Dion, I think Europe, that 2019 Europe show, more than any of the 5 shows, I think that 2019 Sound of Revolution Europe show, it was the ultimate feel good for being a member of Shutdown. What I mean by that was like meeting kids from 20 years ago that came to all our Europe shows, seeing their kids at the show, the vibe, and then playing with all these diverse bands. Like if you look up the lineup for the Sound of Revolution Festival 2019, Youth of Today, Shelter, Terror, Oi bands playing, you had punk bands playing, Ignite, Incendiary, I think played, or Backtrack played, Higher Power played, like so many different bands. It was a great festival. Death Before Dishonor and Bouncing Souls. It was a crazy festival. And the guys in my band, when we got off the stage at that show, I could tell, like I could see it in their eyes that they wanted to do it full time. Like I could just see it. I could literally see it. I could feel it in their bones. We all kind of hugged after the set. It was like that fun a show. Never had we really done that in the last 20 years. And we literally gave each other like this big group hug. And we like, I'll be totally honest with you, like I cried because like it was very emotional for us to have a show like that in Europe after 20 years. And to have to like walk on stage and have people like clapping, and to leave the stage and people like it was just very emotional. And after that show, the next day when I got home, all 3 guys were like texting me, calling me, let's put a record out. Let's go back to Europe. I'm down. I am down. I think one of them actually sent me this text. I am down. And it was like, I was so happy about it, My wife will tell you that, like, for years I was hoping that this would happen, and it was kind of cool because I put kind of the whole thing in Europe into fruition by staying in touch with an old friend. Ever since that show, the guys have been really just wanting to do some new stuff, and so since that show, we did the H2O shows weren't really planned in advance. Like I said, it was kind of like a last minute thing with Toby, but we were so happy to do those, and it was so much fun playing 2 nights in New York, and now playing Black and Blue. after 2006. So this is 16 years since we played Black and Blue, and for it to be in Brooklyn, like it's real special for us, man. Like it's pretty cool. Like I'm excited about it, you know?
It sounds like the stars are kind of like aligned for you. Like the thing that you've wanted to happen just come to fruition, basically.
Yeah, kind of.
And like you
Kind of.
got
I
like
mean,
a different energy to it too. Like maybe you appreciate it more now. Who knows?
oh, I totally do. I totally do. Like it's something that I'm really thankful for. Like hardcore is such a big part of my life because my kids, like, sometimes they don't get it, and I'm listening. Like I cook a lot, and I do a lot of cooking, and like when I cook, I tend to listen to my Bluetooth stereo, and always it's typically like a mishmash of like 80s and 90s hardcore and like new hardcore, and like every now and then like a song comes on and one of my kids will come downstairs and be like, oh, this is pretty cool. But they know like the passion that I have for it. So when they saw the fact that I was able to go play and I came home and they saw the video, in the case of Europe, they saw the live stream and they just thought it was the absolute coolest thing in the world. And I could tell that like for Shutdown, it was very authentic for me to, like I still feel it. Like you could hear it in my voice. Like I am very enthusiastic about it. It's not because it's my band as much as it is just, I don't know. There's something about coming together at a hardcore show, like at a live show. Like for me, yes, I love being on stage, but I also love the connection of like being able to just after the show sit there and give these like very emotional hugs to people that either know me like a brother or people that I may have met once or twice, but they're just, you feel that connection with people like at hardcore shows. That it's like you say, it's different than pop punk. It's like there's such a vibe and connection there. Is the energy at a show, it was at the H2O shows is the best way I could say it. A perfect example would be I had never met until the H2O shows Brian from Be Well. And Brian sang in Battery in the late 90s, who was like a really big hardcore band. Battery was one of those bands that we had never played with in the late 90s. Like you would think Shutdown and Battery, like we would played a ton of shows together. Like they were a Rev band, we were a Victory band. They were both old style sounds. Never played one show with Battery. And I was a fan. So when I met Brian, I love Be Well as well. I'm a big Be Well fan. The dude in Darkest Hour is also in that band, Riff Dojo. So on Instagram. So I met them for the first time. You would think that we knew each other for 20 years. By the second show, when we left, we were like hugging like we were like brothers. I mean, we traded numbers. We were talking for weeks on end. And that's the connection in hardcore. Like now me and Brian are good friends. Like Brian from Be Well is a buddy. And it's like, how did we meet? We only met at that show 6 months ago at H2O. And it blew our minds that like we had never met. We had so many friends that were best friends that we knew that were in the middle of our circle. But Brian and I somehow never met, which was like bizarre. And now it's like we talk all the time. It's like, yo, he's just like me. Like we're so similar in our passion and like what we want to do.
I mean, that's like why this podcast exists, is talking about a time where it was so magical for so many people and that carried for 20 years. Like that mindset never went away. So when you meet someone, you're like, we would have been awesome friends back then. How did it take us so long to meet each other now? And you're like, I don't know, but it's just that thing, it just lives in all of us who were part of that whole thing.
And it's funny, it's totally true because Brian said to me, I told him, I was like, I was a big Battery fan. I'll tell you this, that you probably wouldn't, I don't know that I would say you wouldn't expect, but like a lot of the bigger bands in the late 90s, now I'm going to take Sick of It All and Agnostic Front out of the picture because they always looked out for Shutdown. A lot of like, I'm going to say the bands from the 90s, so those bands really are from the 80s, right? A lot of the like later 90s bands, I'm just being completely honest, they really didn't like Shutdown.
No shit.
And whether it was my voice, we were too young, they didn't think we were that good, I couldn't tell you, but like there was a very large percentage of people in bands that I came to realize as I toured more, like, man, these guys just don't like us. I felt that some really didn't think we should have been on Victory. Like Victory, so after Snapcase, Strife, and Earth Crisis, everybody and their mom wanted to be on Victory. So we were one of the first bands after Hatebreed. Like it was like Hatebreed signed to Victory, and then it was like us, Blood for Blood, Scarhead, all that came after. And I think a lot of people didn't really know us enough to respect us early on. They're like, oh, Victory just signed some 15-year-olds. Just to kind of, it was like a marketing scheme for Tony, hey, I signed a bunch of 15-year-olds, And it really wasn't that, but I always felt like we had something to prove with that, where it was like, yo, like, give us a shot type of thing. And there was a lot of bands back then that really didn't. Like, and I never like aired it out. I wasn't like, I didn't have beef with them, but I knew we had a lot of friends, so I knew from 6 Degrees of Separation, the bands that stayed far away from Shutdown for a reason.
Yeah, but I think at the same time, like you could probably, this is when people started seeing that being on a label was going to benefit their band. So there was a lot of jealousy that started to happen around that time. And if you saw any band getting signed to a label and you're like, why the fuck is that band getting signed to it? It was just because you were a Why Not Me, a lot of it.
I definitely caught a lot of the why the fuck is that band getting signed to Victory. People didn't know that I spent time making those videos from our CBGB shows, writing letters to these labels. Like, they literally thought like we were just like lucky number 7 that Victory picked out of a hat.
Yeah, but at the same time, man, like you can get on a label, but if you're the amount of work that you guys put in and then the amount of shows you're playing, like you guys are showing up in like the crowd, you're growing like a fan base and all that stuff. Like that doesn't happen, like that's not given to you.
Never, never. And I believe that that is the reason, if any, of any impact, if we made any, that's contributed to any kind of, quote unquote success that Shutdown had at that time, because we very much were hands on. You saw me specifically at every show. I mean, I made so many friends back then. I loved it. I didn't go to promote Shutdown. I went because I love the shows. But I was in Shutdown and I would always promote Shutdown, but I loved going to shows. That was what did it for me. People want to see that, I believe that Terror, I'm a big Terror fan. And I believe that Scott from Terror, he has his pulse on the scene all the time. And I believe that he is somebody that goes to shows, that supports bands, that is very active, to the point where like these new bands come out and it's like, that's why they respect him, because they see him. Scott will be at their show. You know what I'm saying? Like, he will promote them. He will promote their band that just came out on Instagram. You know what I mean? So it takes a lot of that. And then I think back and I'm like, wait a minute, that's kind of like what Raybeez was doing for me. So there is a lot of organic, parts of hardcore that are really beautiful, in the sense that it's just the way that older bands look out for younger bands, even in different ways. It doesn't have to be like, Agnostic Front got us on a show. It could very much be, hey, these guys were at this show and, these guys were telling everybody about you guys. Like, I didn't even know. So it was just one of those things where, yeah, you're right. Like, it wasn't just getting signed, because Victory did have about 4 or 5 bands they signed that did no touring, that their records didn't even do anything. I think there was that band Thumb, and there was like 4 or 5 bands, but we were happy to do it, man. I missed the days of touring. I really love doing it. Happy to say we're going to tour again next year. We're going to do like, we're writing a record now. We have about 8 songs done. We're doing Europe in the fall. We're doing like, it's a pretty crazy tour. It's only 11 days, but we're playing 10 countries in 11 days. And we start in the UK in London, which was always a favorite place for us. The London hardcore scene, shout out to the whole London hardcore scene. It is just one of my favorite scenes in the world. And it's just, there's so much passion out there. And we're playing a festival out there, the Ready Eye Fest, which is a conglomerate of kids that book shows out there. Actually, Strife headlined it 2 years ago. And we're like playing with a bunch of other bands, but they're putting it together now. But that's going to be the first show in London. And then we're just like old times, man. We're in a van for 10 days. Got a tour driver, a van driver, and we're in a different country every day. One day we actually play 2 countries in one day. On the Sunday, we go on a Monday and we come back the following week. On one of those days we play, I think it's pretty cool because we never did this, 2 countries in one day. We're playing Belgium in the afternoon and Holland at night. So, and it's about 3 hours apart. So we're playing 2 countries in one day, which is a new thing for us. That'll be a first. We're playing the Czech Republic, which I've never gone to. And every other country we're playing, I want to say we've been before, fortunately, thank God. But, it's really looking forward to that. And then next year, I haven't really announced it yet. Your podcast would be the first one. But next year is 25 years of Against All Odds. So we're actually looking into doing a reissue, and then with the reissue, putting some of these new songs on the reissue, and then doing a full-blown tour, kind of like promoting the new record and then celebrating Against All Odds only. That's probably a 2023 thing that we're looking at now. We're West Coast, East Coast, Europe, and probably South as well. We're going to do the tour in pockets. So we're going to do like West Coast for a week. Because of the way our jobs are set up, we're going to do the East Coast for a week and, maybe do the Midwest. But we're going to make it happen. There's a lot of cool stuff going on.
That's cool, man. I'm just going to start wrapping up because I know you had to be somewhere at 4. I could probably talk to you for fucking so much longer.
I know. You could tell I love doing these things. I appreciate you having me, man.
Yeah, fuck yeah, dude. This has been great. So before I ask the last 2 questions, though, what was the Harley story?
So the Harley story was a good one. We toured after the One King Down tour. Actually, excuse me, before Few and Far Between came out. So we're talking the February and March of 2000. Few and Far Between came out September of 2000. So we were in between. We were still touring heavily, but we were in between Against All Odds and Few and Far Between. We actually had the EP, Something to Prove, that came out. We did a 6-week U.S. tour with Harley and Paris, the version of the Cro-Mags. Rocky George was in that version from Suicidal 2, and All Out War. So it was Cro-Mags, All Out War, Shutdown, U.S. tour. Now that was the time when Harley Flanagan kind of took back the Cro-Mags in that 2000-ish era. If you remember, there's actually a video of Harley and John Joseph. It's probably the only video you'll ever see in 2000 where they did that one surprise show at CB's. But John Joseph was not in the band. And Harley toured with Paris, 2 of the original members. And then they had a couple of other guys. That was 6 weeks with no days off. No days off, 6 weeks, 36 shows in a row.
Jesus.
So I'm sorry, 42 shows in a row. My math is off. So Harley booked it that way. Like he wanted to play as much as possible. And that was like their big kind of coming back tour. And we played really big venues that I never got to play before. We played the House of Blues multiple times on different. We played the Chicago House of Blues, which was amazing. We played House of Blues in New Orleans. We played big venues. Like, I guess, Cro-Mags had a big booking agent. This was like their big comeback tour kind of. So like they were booking. I didn't think they could fill some of these venues, which sometimes the shows were half big, but they were big venues. We never had played some of these. And one of the shows was in Kansas. It was in Topeka, Kansas, probably about 2 weeks into the tour. Harley and me were not very close yet, you could say. And I was just, I was band number 1 on the 3-band tour. And they were cool, but he used to call me Little Man. So I walked into their sound check, and it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We pull into the club in Kansas, Topeka, Kansas, a place called the Bottleneck, still around, I think, or if it's not closed down, famous old club. So I go in, and they're sound checking. I think they're sound checking, whatever great Cro-Mag song. And they get off, and he says on the mic, he's like, "Yo, Little Man, what's up?" And I said, "Hey, what's up, old man?" And he called me Little Man, so I called him Old Man. I was literally joking, right? So he dropped literally, I kid you not, this happened. Mike Score from All Out War, he always tells this story, it's so funny. But Harley dropped his bass. Like he had his bass sound checking. He basically threw it on the floor. I don't want to say dropped. He threw his bass on the floor, like his nice bass, on stage, jumped off the stage. He had no shirt on. He had a winter hat on. That was like his look back then. And he was, Harley's a pretty intimidating looking dude.
Yeah.
And, he's built, he's tatted up. Yeah, he's not tall.
Fucking but he was jacked.
Dude, he was a black belt at that time. So he said, "What the fuck did you just say to me?" And I go, "Oh, you called me Little Man, so I called you Old Man." He grabbed me by the neck. He pinned me against the wall. People thought he was joking until my face started turning purple. And he put me in like a chokehold, or like basically just grabbed me with one palm, his strong hand, and just basically grabbed my neck and pinned me against the wall to the point where like I couldn't breathe. And he goes, "Say that shit again to me, motherfucker."
Oh my God.
Now at this time, everybody jumps off stage. They're pulling him off me. He basically had like a psychotic rage fit. And they're like, "Harley, what the fuck's wrong with you? What the fuck's wrong with you? Why are you what are you doing to Mark?" And he's like, "This motherfucker disrespected me. He called me old man." He goes, "Let me tell you something. HR himself from the Bad Brains would not appreciate that comment, little man." That's literally what he said to me.
Wow.
He dropped HR's name. And and now Harley's like, I'm shaking in fear. And Harley is just like raging out, like so upset. Like just so upset. Like, when somebody just loses their cool, I got to tell you, he'd been an amazing person up to this point. We weren't like super close. So they pull Harley away. He's like breathing heavy. He's like, "I'm sorry, I lost it. I literally lost it. I almost killed him. I lost it." And now my band is yelling at me, and they're like, "Mark, why are you fucking disrespecting Harley Flanagan?" And I'm like, "Dude, he called me Little Man. I called him Old Man. I had no idea he was going to try to kill me." And so now like the bands are kind of making a joke out about it, but Harley's like still raging, and like the bands are just like, "Holy shit, Mark just almost got murdered on tour." He's like, yeah. And so then they all started calling me Little Man just to fuck with me. And at that night, Harley plays the set, and after the show, he calls me over, and I'm like terrified to go over to him, and he's like, "Come here, come here." And I was like, "Fuck, bro." And Steve looks at me in my band. He's like, "Do you want me to come with you?" I was like, "No, I have a feeling it's not going to be bad." And he calls me. He gets me in a headlock, right? And he gets me and I'm not a big guy. He gets me in a headlock. He goes, "I fucking love you, man." He goes, "I'm so sorry." He goes, "Man," he goes, "I just snapped." He goes, "You got to understand, there's a lot of disrespect in this world." And he goes, "And I just thought you were coming from a place that you weren't coming from. The guys explained it to me. You weren't saying it to disrespect me. You were just saying it to be funny. Like I called you Little Man, you called me Old Man." But he goes, "Something inside me snapped." And he goes, and man, I'm so sorry." He goes, I owe you a million apologies." He gave me the biggest hug. He kissed me on the cheek. And he said, "From this day forward, you're going to be my best friend on this tour." And that next day, we became really good friends, man. He, Harley was a stand-up guy on that tour. There was a lot of things that happened, fights in Texas. A cop came to a show in Texas and got into a fight with a kid. The guy turned out to be an undercover cop. The cop tried to close the club down. I mean, so many different stories on that tour that I could tell you. But I got to tell you that Harley looked out for us. Paris looked out for us. The shows were incredible. The very last show of that tour was in New York City at the Bowery Ballroom. And Harley came with gifts for me. And he brought me like gifts, and he told me that, you know, he'll forever feel sorry for that moment, and that he just wants me to know that, like, anything I need, he's got my back. And, you know, touring with him, you know, we're family now. And I got to tell you, like, I really felt like it was like, I love him because he's like, I earned his respect at that point. But, like, yes, he's crazy. Yes, he was Harley. Yes, you know, he did whatever the fuck he wanted to do. But you know what? Shit happens, you know. And I was I wasn't an egotistical kid, but you know what? There was a little bit of respect that maybe I was lacking, in the sense where I was just this 18-year-old kid fucking around. And this guy's been 38 years old, helped start New York hardcore. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I understood it now, whereas back then I just thought, I was just like, wow, what the fuck's wrong with this guy, you know? But now I get it, you know? And Harley didn't murder me. The story is that he actually became friends with me, and he was a really nice person. And I had heard so many horror stories about him up until that point that I didn't know what to believe. And by the end of that tour, it was all hugs, all love, you know? So it's a good story.
It's a great story. Holy shit. That's actually a great way to fucking end this.
Just to finish on that, he actually, I will tell you about Harley. After the incident, we'll call it, at Webster Hall in 2010 or 12, you familiar?
No.
Okay, well, you can Google it, Harley. You know, there was a big story about something that happened at Webster Hall in 2012. Harley wrote a book, and he sent me a message to write something in the book about that moment and that story. There was a lot of things happening at that time with Harley because of this incident that happened at this show. There was a stabbing backstage, and you can look it up.
I just pulled it up of Brooklyn Vegan, but anyone else can look that up.
He was writing the book in the middle of all that, and I have to be honest with you, I didn't want to be involved because I just didn't want to be in the middle of all the nonsense that was going on around it. I'm regretting it to this day that I didn't write my chapter in his book, because it would have made a hell of a story.
Oh my God, yeah.
This is why I'm telling you that, yeah.
Holy shit.
I still have his DM where he's like, he still calls me Little Man. He's like, I haven't talked to him in a few years, but he was like, yo, Little Man, you going to send me that story for my book? And I have his book. His book is amazing. I love his book because it actually tells a story of a kid growing up, you know, in New York hardcore, from his mom to his aunt who raised him. He was 8 years old playing in the simulators in New York City. So I love his book, but I'm always like kind of kicking myself, like, man, I should have told the story about Harley almost killing me on tour. That's just stuff you can't say now. Like, I could tell these are like, that's the stuff stories or legends are made of, you know?
Yeah, I'm like, I have the article up too. I'm just like reading it, being like, man, like, you know, it sounds like I don't obviously
turned his life around. So that was 10 years ago, but yeah.
Jesus Christ. I can't believe I never heard about that. That other story.
Oh yeah, no. This was a very big thing. Even remember, I was in Florida, but it was a very, very, very big thing at the time. So you know, short version is I didn't write my little thing in the book. I probably should have. But it's something that my band and me and All Out War will never forget. All Out War, by the way, are like, those are just my best friends to this day. I love those guys so much. Matt from All Out War has been the drummer in Hatebreed for the last 20 years. And we just have very close friendships with those guys. So it's nice to stay friends with all those bands that I talk about that we tour with. Another favorite band of mine from New Jersey, since you're a Jersey podcast, is a ska band, Catch 22, that we did 2 tours with.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing people, amazing times. I never did a ska tour before. We didn't talk about that, but we did a full-blown ska tour opening for them. They drew 1,000 people a night, and we were playing to kids that had no idea what hardcore music was. And it was kind of cool. It was kind of cool, I got to tell you, because we sold merch, and the next time we toured, a lot of those kids came to our shows. But we did a lot of different tours on Victory, and that was just one of them. We did a full-blown ska tour.
That was the time where a lot of these interviews they talk about, you can go to a show and see a hardcore band, a pop punk band, and a ska band in like the same bill.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Catch 22's record release party for Keysby Nights was us, Hot Water Music, and them. I mean, that's a pretty, Boy Sets Fire, Hot Water Music, Shutdown, and Catch 22. That was their record release show.
Wow.
That's every band is different in that whole group.
Yeah, it's like you could see, besides Catch 22, I guess, but like where the three of you guys, like Boy Sets Fire, Hot Water, and you, there's a roughness, there's an edge there that obviously can bleed a little bit into each other.
The Birch Hill nightclub, I remember that place.
Oh, the fucking Birch Hill. Holy shit. I went to one show there and that was it. And then it closed down like the next year or so.
Yeah, it was a short-lived place. I remember that place well, though.
Oh my God. Well, cool, man. Well, I'm gonna wrap this because you do have to fucking bounce soon.
Yeah, I picked my kids up at 4, and then I work from home remotely. I'm a talent acquisition director, which is basically a fancy way of saying I'm a recruiter internally for a company in New Jersey. Actually, they're based in Red Bank. They're called Merchant Advocate. I'm like their hiring, HR person. So I work from home. I've been working for them for like 5 years. So it's funny, my ties to Jersey never stop. I work for a Jersey company.
Is it Taylor ham or pork roll?
Definitely Taylor ham and egg.
Fucking right it is.
but at the same time, I went vegan 4 years ago, so it's more plant-based now, but like it was always Taylor ham. And my understanding is if you're from South Jersey, it's pork roll, but if you're from North Jersey, it's Taylor ham.
Yeah, I put a mug out. It says it's Taylor ham, you fuck. Like
I love Jersey, man. Like I tell you, like I don't know if you know, 2 of the members of Shutdown live in Jersey.
Where? We're in Jersey. We're in Jersey.
So Dion lives in Marlboro, I believe. Excuse me, Steve and Jimmy live in Long Island. Dion's the only one that lives in Jersey. I'm getting people confused, but I have so many. Like my best friend lives in Toms River. My whole family is all over the place. Colts Neck, Red Bank, Toms River. Then you go towards Ringwood in North Jersey. I have family in Ringwood and Oakland, which are like little towns in North Jersey.
Yeah. Yep.
And so really, like I have family all over the state. And then by the shore, of course, which is when you get closer to Red Bank, I have a family that has a house on the shore.
Well, cool, man. All right, so I'm gonna wrap us up.
Thanks, man. I know I'm a little long-winded in all these stories, so I appreciate it. Whenever you have to edit, like, feel free.
No, I pretty much leave the whole fucking thing in, except the part where I'm like, I'm not gonna put it in. 2 things. One, what would you like to promote? It could be about you. It could be about a friend. It could be about both.
Really, just for us, if this comes out, assuming it comes out before the Black and Blue Bowl, if anybody hears this,
I don't think it's going. When's that show?
May 15th. So if not. Just to kind of keep your eyes and ears open for us, I am myself slowly getting back into promoting Shutdown on social media. I am going to start an Instagram page, so just be on the lookout for that. And then the more people that share it, and we kind of have some catching up to do. So, we are writing new music, which is very exciting for me to talk about. We are going to be touring more than we've done in 20 years. And the nice thing is, like, we've already talked about it, so it's not like I'm hoping the guys are down. Like after Europe, we came together and we put a plan together, and the pandemic delayed it a little bit because Europe was supposed to happen last year. But we very much are still in the plans to go to Europe this year and then do the Against All Odds 25-year anniversary next year. So it's not going to be the last you hear of us. I mean, we're going to be around. I think writing new music is important at this point for us because we don't want people to think we're trying to beat a dead horse. We want people to know that we're still doing this for the same reasons we did when we started the band. And I think that that's the biggest thing in hardcore. As long as your intentions are real, the music always follows.
Yeah, I mean, Kill Your Idols just put out. I think they just put out a new release.
Yeah, and I love them so much, man. I mean, talk about Kill Your Idols and the type of friends they are. I mean, my dad passed away in 2014 and of cancer after 6 months. It was very rough for our family, and I went to New York. And I mention this because it just hits my heart. Is that I was devastated. I was you heard me tell you I'm the youngest of 5 boys. My dad and me were best friends, and he was very close with all his kids. And I got off the plane and I was a mess. And, I went to, the funeral and the wake. And the very first people I saw at that wake were Kill Your Idols. They came to my dad's wake. Gary and Paul were the first people I saw there, and that stays with me. Like that stuff, like these are friends that I made in hardcore 25 years ago. I'm telling you stories about, and of course, Andy sent me a message. He would have been there if he wasn't away. But like, that shit stays with me. And, this is the type of bonds that you form in hardcore music. And this is a good close to this whole thing. It's just like, the friendships that you make with this music, whether they're band to band, person going to a show, connecting with a band, you and me talking now, like friendships and bonds tend to stay. And, to the point where like something tragic in your life happens and the first people that are going to be there for you are the same people that you see on Sunday matinees at hardcore shows from 20 years ago.
Yeah, man.
So that was I love Kill Your Idols. I love every single guy in that band. I love their new music. I love hearing it. And yeah, it's kind of the same trajectory, I guess you could kind of say, with Shutdown. Very similar trajectory. We're down to play these festivals as we get asked. We're down to write new music and come and play, places as we can with our families. So we're very much on the same path.
Well, I think you might have just answered this one, but I end every podcast with this question. I've been doing it since like episode 7. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
Definitely nonconformity. I'm very big into not following what everybody else is doing and going against the grain. And I'm not touching on politics, but I believe that, the roots of this music were started to do what you want without prejudgment, without any kind of, worrying about what's going to happen or who is going to like it. And I carry a lot of that. It's punk rock mentality, really, but it's a hardcore mentality that people like Roger Moret kind of instilled in me when I was young, where, it's okay to have an opinion that's different than everybody else's, even if that opinion isn't something that everybody else agrees with. And I feel like that has stuck with me in hardcore. And I'm not touching on politics as much as I am on just on life. And that's the kind of thing that I try to tell my kids now is, you talk about sheep in hardcore and, there's a lot of followers and this and that. You hear people talk a lot of shit sometimes. And I hate it because to me, it's the opposite. We're into this unique music that you don't see on TV everywhere and that you don't hear on the radio. We love it for the for the actual reasons that we actually like it, that our ears like it, not because everybody else likes it, not because it's cool to everybody. Actually, it's different and very unique, and that's kind of what I take from it. I mean, I teach my kids, I tell them, you don't have to like hardcore, but you don't have to believe, you don't have to follow the herd in everything you do. And I think that's what got me into hardcore, is just the uniqueness of it, the non-conformity part, That's something I carry with me. I'll always carry with me, Question it. Again, this isn't touching on politics, but questioning everything, just you don't have to believe everything everybody tells you. You can like what you like and not care. I can like a band that nobody else in this world likes, but to me, it's music to my ears,